Welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got Tom Abernathy, who's the studio narrative director at ArenaNet, and he's going to be discussing Arrested Development, growing up the games industry, not growing up in the games industry. So, whatever. 6 of one, half dozen of another one. Tom, take it away, man.
All right. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I wish I could see you. I really wish I could hear you. This is going to be one of the weirdest experiences I think I've ever had as a speaker. And it would even be weirder if we hadn't all been doing it this way for the last year, right? I am Tom Abernathy. I'm the studio narrative director at ArenaNet. And I'm really happy to be talking to you guys today. And basically, what my title is getting at, Arrested Development, growing up the games industry. And by the way, there's a little Bluth family stair car for those who get the joke down there at the bottom. What I'm getting at is this. Our field, video game development, is middle-aged at this point, right? We're over 40 years old. And yet, in a lot of ways, we still conduct ourselves as, frankly, anything but a mature industry, especially in AAA, which is my main topic here because that's mostly what I've worked in. And frankly, I think a lot of our players nowadays wonder why that's the case. I mean, our player base is a lot broader than it was even 20 years ago. Our older players are grown-ups. Some of them are as old as me. They're people in their 50s, Gen X folks. And our younger players, frankly, are pretty mature, if my 15-year-old daughter is any indication, and spectacularly diverse in every single way. And I think they're just wondering why we are not keeping up with them in that way. So the thesis statement of the talk is very simple and direct. It is we need to grow up badly, frankly. And we can do that. It's not impossible. But I've been thinking about this a long time. I started having some thoughts around this topic when I first got my first full-time job 16 years ago, which I'll talk about in a bit. There are a lot of areas that we can improve in, but I'm going to focus today on 3 in particular that are things that I have some experience with. Those are content, leadership, and diversity. First, I want to talk about the content that we make and what it is exactly. And what I mean by that is what business are we in? Right? What exactly is the nature of, what is the fundamental and most accurate way to classify the content that we video game developers make? And by way of sort of getting at my thoughts about that, I'll quickly talk to you a little bit about stuff that I've done, not for the usual reasons, but because it's actually relevant to why I think about these things the way that I do. I've been in games now for 22 years. I've worked on over 20 video games. Honestly, I've kind of lost track. And about 10 of those, about half of those got published. I've worked for and with a lot of developers and publishers, especially when I was at Microsoft, where I worked with a whole bunch, like 15 different projects in 5 years. I've worked with Activision and Activision Studios. I was at Pandemic Studios, my first full-time gig. Worked at Microsoft. I've worked with Bungie with certain affinity. I've worked at Riot. I've worked with Ubisoft Massive. And now I am at ArenaNet and have been for more than the last 4 years. On most of the games that I've made, I've been either the sole writer or I've been the narrative lead who running a team of writer narrative designers, or even the narrative director lately in the last few years. And the thing that's kind of mind-blowing, frankly, as I think about it, is that there was no such thing as a narrative designer when I started trying to break in 1998. The phrase did not exist, and frankly, the role did not exist. There were no professional storytellers in games. And I didn't manage to convince somebody to let me try being one and let me write their game until 2004 with Destroy All Humans, which I'll talk about a little later. I was 36 years old at that point. This is a thing I like to tell people who are older trying to get into the business. So what was I doing before that at the age of 36? Well, actually, I was doing a whole lot. I had a number of careers before I finally landed in games. I was a professional child actor. I'm a recovering child actor now, I like to say. I did my first professional stage show when I was 11. I did my first movie when I was 13. I was a professional musician and composer at the age of 14. Wrote my first score for a stage production when I was 16, I think, and my band released our first album when I was 22. I became a theater director at the age of 18. and tried doing that for a living for a while, found out there was no way I was going to make a living at it, decided to go to film school at the age of 26, became a filmmaker, discovered that I really enjoyed screenwriting, which I'd not done anything like before. And at the age of 27, I became a professional at that, having my first screenplay optioned. And so by the time I wrote Destroy All Humans at 36 years old in 2004, Malcolm Gladwell talks about 10,000 hours of experience making you an expert thing. I had thousands upon thousands of hours of experience in all these different things, creating and storytelling in different mediums. And one thing that I had learned how to do as a result was how to take the creative toolkit, the set of skills that I had sort of developed in one medium, and adapt it to a different creative medium, which I really enjoyed doing, to be perfectly honest. So when I walked into Pandemic Studios in Westwood in Los Angeles for my first day as an on-site full-time employee at a game developer at the end of May in 2005, I had one full AAA game under my belt, and I was super excited because it had been amazingly challenging. And there was nobody really to tell me how to do it. Like I said, there were no narrative designers at the time. And so I was really looking forward to continuing to learn how to adapt my storytelling skills to this interactive and frequently non-linear storytelling medium. Very difficult, very exciting. Boy, was I psyched. But I confess that I was working on a pretty big assumption. And it probably played into it that I was still in LA, right? I'd spent 10 years at that point in Hollywood, and now I was going to game developer in LA, and I guess I just sort of assumed that there would be a lot of crossover there. I figured that in joining the games industry, I was joining an industry that was basically a pretty equal combination of software development and entertainment industry. I figured it was around 50-50. That's what made sense to me. Anyway, and I'll get in the reasons for that in just a second. But what was funny was I had a very rude awakening very quickly within my first week, probably within the first 2 or 3 days on site. I quickly became aware that I had really figured that wrong. And that the reality was that in the games business, the real cultural and procedural ratio of software development to entertainment industry was something more along the lines of 90-10. Which is a lot more extreme than I had expected. And now, 16 years later, I would say maybe we've evolved to the point of, I don't know, 85-15, maybe at best. And look, I understand the process borrows heavily from regular software development because that's the form our entertainment takes. But of course, we don't make Excel. We don't make that kind of software, right? What we make is something different. Now, why is that a problem? Well, in my way of thinking, at least, us saying that we are, 85-90% software development, and a lot of times when I hear people describe our business, they call it software development. To me, that's weird. And I'll tell you why, because it sort of reminds me of like if a movie studio, at least up until the last 20 years or so, saying that they were in the business of processing and distributing film stock. Right? Or a record company saying that they're in the business of manufacturing and distributing cassette tapes or compact discs. A movie is not a can of film. A record album isn't a reel of magnetic tape. A video game is not, a magnetic compact disc or a digital download full of code. Those are delivery systems. And there's a science to producing them for sure, but those delivery systems aren't the content. The content is something different. The content is the creative contributions of writers, designers, artists, composers, actors, animators, musicians, editors, engineers, creative directors, creative producers, all of those different disciplines and the way that all of those contributions come together to make a creative entertainment experience. And frankly, I think that you can say that and should say that about our content. In other words, the elements that go into making our content, as distinct from the technological way it's captured and delivered, are a lot more similar to the elements that go into making content in other entertainment media, like movies, television, even theater. And so I expected that the games industry would be more attuned to that and more informed by other creative entertainment media, and frankly, have more similarities in some of its processes. But the fact was, I quickly realized those other media's industry cultures are not much like the culture that the game industry has fostered. And they're also not an area that we in games have regularly looked to much for ideas. And by the way, parenthetically, this is not me saying we need to do everything like Hollywood at all. I am not that guy. I left Hollywood. I got out of Hollywood because of how screwed up it was in lots of ways. So I'm not romanticizing it. Actually, this doesn't have anything to do at all with my experiences as a creative. It has a lot more to do with my experiences as a player. Join me in the Wayback Machine as I go back to the time right after I got out of film school in LA, 1997. And I was, had very little time and money. I had a friend named Joseph I'd grown up with who moved to LA because he was able to get a job being a production assistant at Activision Studios. And he rented the apartment right above me in Koreatown. And every night we would sit in my apartment and we would play PS1 games and bitch to each other about the storytelling. And this is something I actually felt very strongly about, and anybody who's listening who knows me will not be surprised to hear that. But the thing was, I had very limited time and money. And the fact was games were competing for that time and that money with other things, movies, TV, books, watching my favorite sports team, the Atlanta Braves, on TBS because they've been champions lately and they were all over national. Frankly, my girlfriend. Games were competing with all of these things for my attention and my money. And if they couldn't compete, they weren't going to be able to get my time and my money. And so, we would sit there playing them and complaining to each other about how bad the storytelling was because games were just getting technologically to the point where people were trying to do more ambitious things. And Joseph would say he wished he could get me in at Activision Studios because he really felt like, I could do a lot of things to help make their games better. And I said, that sounds awesome to me. I'd really love to do that, being a lifelong gamer, as well as a bunch of other things. And that's why I started trying to get into games, frankly. That's what motivated it. I wanted the storytelling in my games, the games that I played, to be as good as the storytelling in a lot of the movies and TV shows that I watched. I wanted it to be as compelling as my baseball team was. I wanted it to be as addictive as my girlfriend was. It had to be able to compete on a higher level than, frankly, most games were doing. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but that's how I felt. So how do we do that? How do we compete? By the way, that little logo down there for the Quality Bar is a bar in Portland, Oregon. So anybody who knows that bar, that one's for you. What does the minimum creative quality bar look like? What should it look like for our business? Obviously, I'm a narrative person, a creative person, and so a lot of the way I'm talking about this stuff is going to be from that angle, but this is not all just exclusive to narrative, believe me. But using narrative as an example for this one, on our team at ArenaNet, what I describe the quality bar, the minimum quality bar to our team is basically the equivalent of an average good Marvel movie, or maybe a better than average episode of The Witcher. Frankly, if we hit a higher bar, that's great. And a lot of the times we do, which is awesome, but that should be our floor. I don't want anything we put out being less strong from a storytelling point of view than that. So that's one way we compete. Another way that we compete is thinking hard about the decision-making model that our studios and our processes are organized around. Right? I think we need to normalize having creative voices in the room when important decisions are being made. And I don't just mean creative decisions. I mean decisions that have to do with the team or the studio as a whole, right? Or even the product. Now, I know that happens at some companies, but a lot of companies it does not. And I'm not suggesting that creators should be making those decisions by any stretch of the imagination. I have lived through that situation, and it is not better than the opposite. Because the fact of the matter is you can't succeed if you don't ship, right? But creative needs to be in the room, and its voice and opinions need to be taken into account in the decision-making. Now, like I said, some game companies already work that way, and they have both creative and commercial success doing it, which is awesome. But at the other end of the spectrum is this entirely production-driven model that pervades the cultures at some of the biggest publishers and the first-party developers that they own or work with, third-party that they work with. I won't name names, but I doubt if for those of you who've been in the industry very long, I don't have to, I think. And the thing is, then folks from those companies sometimes leave those companies, they go get jobs elsewhere, and they start exporting everything that's, not good about those cultures to the new place. In this production-driven model, production makes all the decisions with no consideration or input from creative. Now, the upside to that is things ship, and I get that. That's important, right? Remember, I come from micro-budget filmmaking. I mean, you know, when you're spending 10 days shooting a movie and you have $15,000, your schedule and budget better be planned down to the second and the dime. And if you miss your day, if you don't get all your shots, if you need more days to shoot, if you run out of film stock, this was, bear with me, 25 years ago when we still shot on film stock, but that's my experience, you know, you're screwed. So I understand the importance of those things being, you know, really well adhered to. So things ship, sure, but the downside is the things that ship may not be very good. And even if they are, frankly, and this is an important point, and I'm going to come back to it over and over again, the experience can be traumatic for the game devs who are making the game. Okay? This kind of culture is sort of an outgrowth of the way MBA programs in the 80s kind of made a philosophical realignment to decide that it doesn't matter what you're making or selling. It just matters how you make and sell it, right? The products are widgets. They're interchangeable. Doesn't matter. That works fine for toasters or blankets or insurance policies. It's not so great for creative entertainment products, because creative entertainment products of whatever form and whatever medium are meant to be about something. They're meant to move people, right? We want people to get emotional about our games. We even want people to fall in love with our games if we can make that happen. Nobody falls in love with a toaster. I promise you nobody falls in love with an insurance policy. And look, obviously the problem here isn't limited to our industry. I mean, a lot of the issues that we've got are also endemic to Hollywood, where everything is about huge franchises and sequels, super large budget stuff, tentpole stuff, or maybe little bitty indie stuff, and there's like nothing in between, right? The MBAs have taken over there as well. So as I said before, I'm not romanticizing the past. I'm not romanticizing other entertainment industries. I'm trying to fix the problems in ours, and I'm trying to find a better way forward. And the fact is that production-driven model where creative has no voice in things is kind of weird. No other creative entertainment industry uses it. We're the only one that has some companies that do. So let's talk about solutions. Action items when we're focusing on content. First of all, set the minimum quality bar commensurate with that in other entertainment media. And you can decide what that means to you. But the important part is understand you're competing with them, right? A sub point here is you may need and want to encourage some of your game devs, especially the younger ones, to expose themselves to a broader range of cultural influences. When I started at Riot, about half the team was really young folks just out of college, and they were super smart and talented. But as one of them said to me in one of our first one-on-ones, she was like, you know, I feel like all of my cultural references are basically video games and anime, and you're making references that I don't understand. Can you give me a list of things, like a reading list or a viewing list of things to go kind of educate myself with? And I loved that, and I did that for the team. It may be helpful to sort of push them to do that. And the second thing, as I said, is involve creative voices in the decision-making. Normalize that left brain, right brain partnership at every level of magnification. And what I mean by that, if that doesn't make sense to you, is that the way that most other entertainment industries are set up is that there is a left brain producer type and a right brain creative type who are partners at sort of every level of activity, from what we would call the individual contributor, you know, to the director of a movie and the main exec producer of a movie, all the way up to like a studio head or a network head. And usually that person at the very top is a producer type, but they really, if they're doing the job right, they really only break ties when the other folks can't agree, right? The tension between right and left brain is actually healthy. It makes sure that both sides' imperatives, which are both legitimate, get addressed in hopefully some sort of effective way. So again, some game companies use this and they use it really effectively and it works for them. And I don't understand why we don't all. It's a bit confusing to me. The second area that I want to look at is leadership, which kind of relates to the previous one for what are probably obvious reasons. And when I bring up leadership, what I basically am getting at is this. Our industry doesn't know what makes for a good game director. One of the early games that I worked on, I won't name names, but it was an amazing team, an incredibly incompetent game director. He had gotten lucky at another company and made some serious money when they got sold. And he got this gig that he wasn't really qualified for experience-wise because he was a good friend of the guys who had started the studio. Stop me if you've heard this story before. And the fact was that because of his incompetence, not a bad guy, but because of his incompetence, he repeatedly hindered or failed utterly an exceptionally competent and creative team. I mean, these people were amazing. I'm still in awe of them. I'm still tight with a lot of them. And the fact was that the game ended up being a critical and creative success despite him, thank goodness. But God, the process was hellish on everybody. We don't know what the qualifications, the appropriate qualifications for a game director should be in our industry. Too many folks seem to think that it's about mastery of the details, especially technical details. And the thing that kind of is weird to me about that is that's literally the opposite of what a director's job is supposed to be. A director is supposed to focus on the big picture. A director is supposed to articulate a vision for the whole project and help everybody to understand what it is, and then lead everybody to march in one direction to accomplish that. They're not supposed to be obsessed with the small picture. If they're doing that, they're doing people's jobs for them. That's not their role. But frankly, I think it's not surprising that we don't understand that so much about what makes good game directors, because when you get right down to it, I'm not sure that we understand what criteria make for good leaders in general in our industry. And that's a big problem. Because, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know if you've been in this business a while, as a rule, we don't train people effectively for leadership positions at any level. Not leads, not discipline directors, not executives, managers, nobody. We throw them in the deep end and expect them to sink or swim. And a lot of times they sink. Sometimes there are mentors around who can just specifically work with them one-on-one and grow them. That's awesome. But otherwise, a lot of times they get no real support. And frankly, this is a problem that we might be able to solve more effectively by doing a better job of growing talent from within, or developing leaders who are already in our ranks at our companies, at our studios, at our publishers. Except we don't know how to do that either. We don't know how to grow competent leaders. We don't know what we're looking for, and we don't know how to get it, and we don't even know how to grow it. And we definitely don't want outsiders telling us how. That's sort of a legacy of the early computer dude ethos, I think, right? We don't trust outside experts, man. We can do it all ourselves. We don't trust elites. We don't want to believe anybody else, any other discipline, any other industry has anything we can learn from to improve how we do things. As an industry, we're a little arrogant in that way, and I think it holds us back. A quick and not exhaustive list of reasons that I have seen leaders get hired or promoted at some of the places that I've worked or worked with. They know someone like that director that I just mentioned a second ago. He was best friends with the two guys who started the company, so boom. Another criterion is you better play our game all the time. If you've applied to a number of different studios in this business, then you probably have some idea of some of the ones who do this, right? That's like a requirement. Like, you better be a super advanced player of our game. If you're not, we're not even going to talk to you. Come back to us when you are, right? Another one is that I think is kind of weird is you need to have worked on a game just like the one you're applying to work on, just like it, right? If I have a Space Force game that I'm making, you better have worked on a game about a Space Force or something. Seniority. This is one of my favorites because frankly, in a lot of other businesses, it is used as a criterion, but I think, again, incorrectly, because all that tells you is how long somebody's been doing something or been at a certain place. It doesn't tell you whether they've been doing it well. And that's what really should matter when people are getting hired or promoted. And then the fifth one that I put on here is this phrase that I've heard it more than one place, but especially at one place. That's we hire gamers. I worked at one company that literally had an offsite for 2 days to discuss partially this question. Should we say that? What do we mean when we say it? They better be gamers, man, core gamers. I had a guy once tell me that if I didn't play PC games exclusively, that I wasn't a core gamer. I thought that was interesting. The point is, every one of these has been featured in a job description that I was applying for, and or has been pitched to me by hiring managers as appropriate criteria for making a hiring decision. It is amazing how many people in our industry think any of these are great reasons to hire someone. But if you drill down on them, it's not hard to figure out why, because when you drill down, you realize all of these are really about protecting the status quo. Because a lot of hiring managers, a lot of leaders in companies think that is the great way to maintain their company's greatness, if they see it as that. But the problem is maintaining the status quo only helps you stagnate, right? It only helps you calcify. And it's a real good way to keep new blood and new ideas out of your sphere and to preserve this sort of self-congratulatory delusion that one finds at a lot of companies and games, that any success that you've had was due to your peculiar iconoclastic genius and that other people need to come learn how to be more like you, right? It's kind of the game's version of the myth of meritocracy. Like I said, we can be pretty arrogant as a culture in our industry. So, some solutions for doing better with leadership. As I said, adopting more effective criteria for hiring and promotion. For example, seniority is not a relevant criterion. It is not. It's not relevant at all. I don't care if you've only been here a month and a half. Performance and skills are the things that people should be hired or promoted for. Secondly, stop only hiring or promoting your friends. Not saying you should never hire or promote your friends. We all like working with people we like, right? But stop doing it only because they're your friends and not because they actually deserve it or earn it or will make you better. Frankly, as I said, this is one reason why we have so many folks, aspiring game devs, emergent talent, wanting to get into our business and finding it almost impossible to do so. And frankly, it needs to change. Normalize hiring for things that can't be quickly or readily learned or taught. I'll talk more about this in a little while, but the point is focus on the things that can, right? Teach the things that can. Hire people based on the things that can't be quickly or readily learned or taught, and teach them the things that can. You can teach them your game. You can teach them your tools. You can teach them your processes. Again, more about that coming. And lastly, make strong collaboration skills a job requirement. Because people who are difficult to work with, life's too short, frankly. Now, you may have heard some of these ideas espoused before, by the way. They're not original to me. Some of them are from the Netflix deck, if you're familiar with that, and some other places I've worked which have been tried to be forward-thinking about some of these issues. And maybe even the place you work at uses some of this stuff. But I have also worked at some places where some of these things were stated openly as company values and then completely ignored in practice in the most hypocritical way that I could imagine. So it's not good enough to talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. And that brings me to the third way in which we need to grow up. I can hear eyes glazing over. Bear with me for a sec. Fact. Video games, the developers, and the gamer culture have so long and historically been characterized by a kind of adolescent frat boy image and reality often, that our society, frankly, at large, still thinks that's what we are, thinks that's all we are. Even as, like I said before, you got people, Gen X folks in their 50s like me, playing games all the time. Even as women constitute the majority of people who play games, and that's been true for almost a decade now. Even as millennials and Gen Z and now Generation Alpha, with every preceding year, are making our society more diverse in race, in ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation. Those demographic changes are happening as we speak. We're moving from Animal House to Generation on HBO Max. And by the way, if you haven't watched that show, you should. It's really awesome. Created by a 17-year-old. These changes are happening as we speak, and they're simply incontrovertible. Okay? It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact. Now, like I said, I know some people, they see the word diversity and they sort of go, oh, do we have to talk about this again? Okay. Bear with me. And yes, look, we've heard some encouraging rhetoric on diversity from game companies lately, which is nice. Of course, a lot of that has been by way of apologizing for past problems in their culture, and by way of promising change, which is good that they promise that. And sometimes it actually even happens, at least to some degree, at some companies. I'm amazed to hear some reports from some folks that I know at companies that have had big problems in that way about the changes that they are seeing happening and the optimism they have. And that's awesome. But look, we are in an era when, frankly, every female, trans, or out queer dev endures incessant harassment or worse if they dare to have an internet or social media presence of any sort. And in an era when that's true, and when even companies that make good faith efforts to increase diversity have trouble making significant headway, this is not a problem we've solved. It's not even a problem we've made appreciably better. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the moral case for diverse game companies, because frankly, if you don't get that by now, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not even going to talk about the business case, because I did a talk on that at GDC a number of years ago called Special Sauce, and you're welcome to go to the vault there and watch that if you want. What I'm going to do today briefly is highlight the creative case. Right? Player bases are becoming more diverse all the time and growing in new markets around the world. And frankly, a lot of games, especially not AAA ones that aren't aiming to be first-party tentpole franchises, a lot of games are diversifying in terms of audience that they want to reach, because that's a good way to build a market, right? Is to identify a segment of potential gamers who aren't being served necessarily. So the best way you can do that, frankly, is to hire people with more diverse backgrounds, with different voices, with different experiences from the majority of game devs to work in your company and help make the games that a more diverse player base will maybe want to buy and play. And the thing about that is it becomes a positive feedback loop. I've been amazed, frankly, in my time at ArenaNet, when I walked in the door to find that we had a game that already had a lot more women players, a lot more out queer players, a lot more players of color than some other similar games. And we've leaned into that in terms of representation within the game, certainly in terms of representation on my team with devs making the game, in order to get some of those diverse perspectives and experiences and voices in. And the response from players has been amazing. And so it just becomes this great positive feedback loop that just builds players' love for your game, which is what we want. And look, the fact is we need that diversity. Once we start achieving it in the dev ranks, we need to more robustly reach into leadership ranks as well. The problem is, to be perfectly honest, and I say this as someone who has actively been trying to do that for years, it's hard to do without having a lot of people in your dev ranks from underrepresented groups traditionally, right? So our lack of success in diversifying employee ranks leads to a lack of success in diversifying our leadership ranks. And that's not okay. It has to change. It is not okay for this industry still to be largely made up of cis white dudes. So how do we make that happen? Well, I want to go back for a second to the leadership action items, because some of them are really relevant to this as well. Recall what I said previously about redefining the criteria that we hire for. This is the secret key to unlocking not just better leadership, but better diversity in general at your company. Again, things that a new employee can be taught or can learn in a relatively short amount of time. Playing your game, knowing your lore, learning your tool set. Things they can't quickly learn or be taught are, for example, demonstrated skills in their discipline. How to think like a game dev, not a gamer, that's a different thing, but as a game dev, as someone who makes games. Taste, right? That quality bar issue, a sense of what good looks like. And honestly, again, we may as well go ahead and include strong collaboration skills and just call these leadership and diversity action items, these three, because these are the criteria that we hire for on the narrative team at ArenaNet and have done for the last 4 years. And as I said before, they are in no way exclusive to narrative, right? These are things that certainly any creative discipline they apply, and maybe even some that aren't creative disciplines. You can learn to play Guild Wars 2. You can read our lore wiki or watch long play videos to get the story if that's what you need to do. You can even learn our tool set. It may not be the most fun experience you've ever had, but you can do it. But you know what you can't do quickly? You can't learn to write quickly. You can't learn to design quickly or animate quickly. And I and other people can't teach you to do those things quickly. Those things take years to develop. You can't all of a sudden have an evolved sense of how to think about going about making a game. That takes some experience, or there is a loophole here. Even there's a way of doing it without experience, frankly. On my team, we absolutely consider and hire people who have no experience in games, but we do expect that even if they don't have that experience, that they have taken the mindset that they've used being creative in other areas, other mediums, and applied it when they're playing a game to the thought process of what it might be like to make a game, right? So that they've already begun sort of, grokking the basics of our operating system, our mental operating system, if you will, in their minds. And look, to be fair, frankly, it's not fair to expect someone who's been a pain to work with for years to suddenly do a U-turn on that skill. That's not likely to happen. So we expect people to be a culture fit coming in, if not a culture add, which is even better. Because life is just too short to work with jerks. And if it's too short to work with jerks as devs, that goes double or maybe exponential, if that's a thing, for leadership. Because the potential for a jerk to spread the pain around as a leader and do a lot of damage is enormous. It's too great. The reality is every game dev I know has PTSD. Every single one. Some of them extreme. I know I've got it. And I bet a lot of you do too. And that's because primarily so many people in leadership positions in our industry traumatize the people who work for them over and over. And that needs to stop. Now, I talked about experience. That's sort of the big sore thumb in this situation, right? It sticks out when you want to become more diverse. Because the thing about experience, we all know the truism that, everybody wants you to have experience when you apply for a job, but you can't get experience until somebody hires you. And I see aspiring devs complain justifiably about this stuff on social media all the time. Most of us have had to deal with that catch-22 for a while, at least at the beginning of our careers. But what not everybody may be aware of is that this is a problem. That catch-22 is a problem that's even worse for people from underrepresented groups in game development. Because the fact is, there often isn't a level playing field for them to get in the first place. I mean, it's hard enough, frankly, for an upper middle class white cis dude to get into this business. It ain't easy for anybody. But if you're, say, a woman whose aptitude for STEM subjects was discouraged your whole time in secondary school by teachers who were old-fashioned in their thinking, or if you grew up black or brown or working class or homeless, and you didn't get put in honors level courses in school because somebody assumed you just wouldn't be able to cut it because of one of those things, if your family didn't have the money to send you to college, at least not with incurring outrageous debt that they and you couldn't in good conscience take on. If you simply ever felt doubly alienated from the mainstream because you were a nerdy gamer who was also a girl or non-binary or trans or queer, any of this stuff, if any of those things are true or things like them, then the hill you have to climb to get into this industry is just that much steeper. And sometimes it's a lot steeper. So what do we do about that? All right. First of all, when you're hiring, be proactive, okay? Normalize looking for potential candidates in less explored places. Normalize reaching out to them if you need to, not just expecting them to apply in response to a JD, to a job description. Because most of us who are hiring managers know that when you do that, 75% of what you get is applications from people that a colleague of mine referred to as overconfident white boys. Who don't have the qualifications. Whereas folks from underrepresented groups, data shows, have a tendency to underrate their qualifications for a thing. If there are 5 bullet points that the job description says it wants you to have, your normal white guy is going to look at that and go, hey, I got 2. I'm going to apply. Sometimes they'll do it if they don't have any. Whereas somebody who is not a cis white dude is going to look at that and go, well, gosh, I've only got 4 of the 5. They would never hire me. I shouldn't apply. This is a truism. It is known, as the Dothraki would say. Okay. Isolate the proper criteria for the role along the lines of what we've been talking about. The true prerequisites that can't be taught or learned quickly or readily, and focus on those when you're recruiting and hiring. And understand that experience is going to be in short supply in underserved groups for a while still, okay? That's not something that we can fix quickly. So instead, what you need to be looking for is potential, right? Looking for relevant skills that may be transferable. People with the right mindset to come into a game development environment and succeed. And if it's necessary, go find folks in those groups who want to grow into devs and help them do so. Mentor them, either one-on-one or at ArenaNet. Bobby Stein has built a mentorship program that we do for folks from underrepresented groups of various sorts that's been incredibly successful. We help them learn some of the stuff that can be learned quickly. We help them build a portfolio. We help them begin to make a network of industry contacts. We help grow them into viable candidates. For us, maybe. If not for us, for some other company that will benefit. And not just that company will benefit. The industry will benefit. More about that in a second. And then once you've done that, then you take those people and grow them into leadership roles. That's how you diversify leadership ranks in our industry. It's not going to be a fast process necessarily, although it can be. I have seen people come in with no experience in games, but a ton of relevant skills who, well, I'll just tell you, I mean, we've hired a couple of people, one of whom we hired to be a story editor. She came from interactive immersive theater, producing interactive theater, which turned out to be the perfect skill set for being a sort of creative producer in games. And after a year, she got hired to be narrative lead at Bungie. That's how quickly she progressed. Hired another woman who had never worked in games, but had a lot of experience in live TV production. Black woman, Muslim, brought an amazing new perspective to our group, which really informed a lot of the content over the last couple of years that we've done for Guild Wars 2, involving colonialism and white supremacy and white nationalism and stuff like that. And after a year and a half, she got hired to be the narrative director at Undead Labs. And I'm not sure, but she may be the only Black woman narrative director in the industry. It wouldn't surprise me. We got a bunch of people who are success stories in that way that I could talk about if I had more time. Again, the point is this: you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it for them. And you're doing it to help all of us in the industry do a better job of reflecting the experiences of our diverse and rapidly diversifying group of players. Because the goal has to be to accomplish it for the whole industry, okay? The devs benefit, yes. The industry benefits. The players benefit. And hopefully maybe you personally do too. Again, this is why I wanted to get into games all those years ago when I was playing with my friend Joseph, you know, good PS1 games, but they had crappy storytelling, right? I wanted to make storytelling in the industry, in the medium of video games better. That wasn't just what I wanted as a creative, it's what I wanted as a player. So how do we grow up the games industry? That's how we do it, okay? We stop focusing on ourselves, on our companies, and we start focusing on being the change we want to see on an industry-wide scale. Because look, that's what grown-ups do, at least if you're doing it right, right? You mature enough to realize it's not all about you. And some of us, you know, have kids, and that makes us even more aware of that, because once you have a child, most of us anyway, you know, you are suddenly no longer the center of your own universe. My sister says, your heart now lives outside your body. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about their safety, their happiness. It's about the world they're going to live in. the world that you're going to leave them someday. It's not a perfect metaphor for the topic, but it's not bad. So I've committed and resolved, and I ask you to resolve with me and commit to making it not all about us. Let's grow up. That's my talk. And I appreciate everybody who came to listen and watch. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter and interact with me directly. I will happily do that. And we got a little over 5 minutes left for some questions if anybody has it.
You got 15 minutes, Tom.
Oh,
Plenty of time.
I thought I had to be done at 50.
No, this isn't like these old conferences that you and I used to go to where we have to run from, South Hall over to West Hall.
Nice. Okay.
I literally just have to type and tell Dan we're clear and the next talk starts. It's fancy. And I want you to know, you made me realize something during this talk.
What's that?
I manifest my PTSD through cynicism and grumpiness. That's how I do it.
You are not the only one, my friend.
All right. We got a lot of good questions in here. All right. So hold on. I have to scroll all the way back up. Mm-hmm. Where are we going to start? So Sonic Tim says, absolutely agree with regards to storytelling in games. One reason I was interested in making games was the mediocre quality of many of the PS2 games. Yeah. Tim, you obviously did not play many of the GBA games I was involved with because those made PS2 look like Tolstoy. Okay, here we go. CJ, you talk about quality bars and broader cultural references. How can we reconcile the narrative aspirations of a mid-tier Marvel movie with, say, something like RuPaul's Drag Race, which he brings together, both of which are very popular and involve costumed characters?
For sure. For sure. So, I mean, I think actually the answer to that isn't so complicated, right? It depends on it depends on a lot of things. First of all, it depends on how big your studio or your team is, what kind of resources you've got financially and time-wise, what your goal is, what the audience is you're trying to reach. Are you making a little, indie game that you hope to sell on Steam for $5 that'll be maybe 4 or 5 hours long to play? Are you making a mobile game? Because there's actually a lot of stuff in the mobile and casual part of the industry right now that is very much aimed towards the sort of audience that Drag Race attracts. And obviously, yeah, I mean, a Marvel movie is intended to be, in terms of ambition and in terms of the resources that are spent on it, an enormous thing that reaches the widest possible audience, right? But I mean, quality isn't about how many people you're trying to reach or how many you do. Parasite last year, the movie that won Best Picture, Korean film, first foreign language film ever to win Best Picture. That's a movie that was made for, I think, about $20 million American, and frankly, that most of the time in history, one would expect it to have a very niche audience in America, and in fact, it was a huge success. And people being stuck at home because the pandemic might have had a little part to do with that, but mostly it came out before that, so I don't think so. I think. It's a matter of understanding what all the variables are in terms of your plan and what you're aiming to achieve, and making sure then that you plan in a way that is appropriate to the scale of that, and also that your quality bar has been chosen appropriately for that. I absolutely think, I mean, if the question is, how do I get more people, the audience of a Marvel movie, to be interested in a RuPaul Drag Race kind of game, I'm not sure exactly right this second, but I'd love to think about it and brainstorm with you, because that's an exciting question.
So Talon asked, what are your thoughts on writing for branching paths and differences in New Game Plus, and how different is that from regular linear screenwriting to you?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, you have hit on, and believe me, I could do a whole 2 hours on that, right? When I first started writing in games, well, the first job I had was at Activision Studios. I wrote cutscenes for a game called Heavy Gear. This is in 1999, I think. And when I say cutscenes, what I mean is literally, I wrote scenes that were videotaped with actors on a very cheap set and then stuck in the CD-ROM as things that would play when you completed a level as a kind of reward. The first game that I really wrote proper was Destroy All Humans, and I did that from my home as a contractor. The team was in Australia, and the company itself mainly was in Los Angeles. And so I had nobody to explain to me this thing about how game narrative worked. I mean, as it turned out, there was nobody to explain it anyway. Nobody knew yet. But what so I sort of felt like I would tell people that like I was putting together a jigsaw puzzle with my hands in a black bag, not being able to see the pieces during that process. But I learned a ton, and I really loved the challenge. And the main aspect of the challenge that I learned quickly, and again, because I had worked in so many other creative entertainment media in different kinds of roles, this was a thing that did not come as a shock to me. I learned that there were tools in my writer toolkit that I had learned in film school and that I could use writing a film script or a TV script or a stage play or a novel for that matter, that simply weren't available to me in the same way when I was making a video game. Because, as you say, video games are meant to be interactive, not passive. And because frequently they are nonlinear, at least to some degree, right? And so there are all sorts of things that you're used to being able to sort of deploy in order to achieve a certain mood or tone or whatever on the audience, that are based on your ability to control sequence and timing, right? Suspense, dramatic irony. You can't do dramatic irony because the audience has to know something that people on the screen or the stage don't. And in a video game, the audience is the player character, and that doesn't work, right? I mean, there are a lot of different things that aren't the same as writing in a linear way. And so what you learn is I have to let those go. I have to give those up, but I also get to embrace some things that aren't usually in my toolkit in those other media. Branching trees is a great example. You have to be careful how many choices you give, because as Mitch Hurwitz found out when he did a 4th season of Arrested Development and thought he was going to make it totally nonlinear and you could go through 15 episodes in whatever order you wanted to, that's over 3 trillion possible paths. I did the math, and that's not going to work, right? So I mean, our job sometimes is more about giving players the sense that they have agency than it is about really giving them agency. And most branching stuff sort of all comes back at the end to where it started, or to one place rather. But that is one of the things you don't get to do in most projects in any other medium. And it's a lot of fun to give players those choices and let them choose how they're going to move through stuff. We did at the one of the first things I did at ArenaNet when I got there, we were working on the end of Path of Fire, our last expansion, and we wanted to have leadership wanted to have a scene where the commander, which is the way that player characters refer to, and their guildmates, having just beaten a god, but also knowing that there's a big elder dragon out there still flying around, that they are invited to a party by the villagers, basically in the area that they fought the god in, to celebrate the victory and basically just in their honor, right? And some of leadership really wanted there to be a speech from the commander that was very heroic and congratulated the villagers for playing their part and sort of was very square jawed and everything. And I said, I don't know, man. I feel like these are more like first responders. They're more like working class dudes who they're like the Ghostbusters, except not silly. And after all this, what they probably want to do is put their feet up and have a beer. They don't really want to go to a party. So I'm just not sure how into that I feel like they would be. And so the compromise that we found was we sort of wrote 3 different tracks for the conversation to go, and you could move between them at each inflection point so that you could decide sort of how your commander, how your player character was feeling in the moment about all that stuff, and customize it to what you were feeling. And that's a thing that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do in any other medium. And that's just one example of the kinds of opportunities that are available to us. And it's why I love this medium, and I've worked exclusively in it now for over 16 years.
So we've got a couple here that somewhat flow together.
Okay.
Jessica said, I've heard to be a good leader, you have to be a great follower. Is this a great philosophy that we can adapt for the industry? But before you go, there's 2 more I want to throw in here.
Okay.
Because, she also follows up with, would you say that if we alienated women like myself from playing games, the industry would be in trouble? And then there was a Nintendo freak said, if newbies and inexperienced people can't get in, what would be the future of the industry? Now, I know those are all like tangential, but they all do kind of fit together.
For sure. I may have to ask you to repeat the first one in a second, but I'll answer the second two first. So first, the question about women. Yes, that would be terrible. We should not do it. We should do the opposite of that. We should be working hard not to alienate women, but to make this industry more inviting, more accessible, more a place that they want to be and that is safe for them to be and not traumatizing. And the extent to which it is not those things, honestly, makes me sick to my stomach when I think about it hard. That's got to happen. In terms of the question from the Nintendo guy, or I don't know if it was a guy, sorry, Nintendo person. Yes, absolutely. One of the points that I tried to make a couple times in this talk was that we need new blood and new ideas. We need all that passion and energy that young aspiring devs bring. And if we're not going to do a better job of giving them ways to get into the industry, then we might as well, frankly, hang it up. I mean, again, we will stagnate, we will calcify. That's just doing the same thing forever. And that's not how you evolve. It's not how you progress. It's not how you improve. It's the wrong mindset to bring in. Read the first one for me one more time, please.
Oh, all right. I just gotta scroll. To be a good leader, you've got to be a great follower. Is that a good philosophy we can adapt for the industry?
That's an interesting saying. I don't know that I've ever heard that before, and I would have to think about it. But my immediate response is, yeah, probably. I mean, I know that for myself, that I am kind of, as a friend of mine says, I'm the camp of lead, follow, or get out of the way, right? If I have a good leader to follow, I love following a good leader. I'm happy in that situation. I think most people are, frankly. I think that's a common human thing. If I am following a bad leader, I'm not so good as a follower because it's very difficult for me to sort of not be constantly kind of irritated by the incompetence of the leader and want, frankly, to tell them about it. Not because I want to be mean to them, because I want to help them be better. I don't like following incompetent leaders at all. And so if those are the first two options and those things have been eliminated, then, what I will say, frankly, is how about you do us all a favor and give me a chance? Because I know how to be a leader of people. I know how to be a team leader. I know how to be a manager. And I know how to be a creative director, a leader of a team in that way. And those are skills that I developed over a long period of time. And if you haven't, no offense, that's okay. You can, but you're, like I said, you're probably not really qualified to be in the role that you're in. So move over and let somebody who is do it.
All right. So we've got like 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Are you on the Discord?
I'm not on the Discord now.
Can we convince you to be on the Discord? Because there are a lot of questions on here that we're not going to be able to get to.
Sure. I can get on to after the session's over. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you one last question. Then I'm going to kick it over to Dan to get Danny started on his, and then you and I behind the scenes will get you on the Discord and everything. Gotcha. So Kevin Wolf says, where can members of underrepresented groups find the types of mentorships you described?
That is an excellent question. So first, obviously, I would say follow me and Bobby Stein both on Twitter because we tweet about the one that we have set up at ArenaNet frequently. That is the only large organized such effort I'm aware of, but I do know there are lots of organizations like Women in Games, Blacks in Games, stuff like that.
It's going to be like minutes
that have similar kinds of activities that they do. We've been trying for a while to get other studios and publishers in the Seattle area to work with us and enlarge what we're doing. Been some interest, but the pandemic sort of put a dent into that for a little while. Hopefully we will get that back on track soon. I wish I had more answers for you. I don't, but I think there are some people out there who do it. And it may be a thing where you just need to get on Instagram or Twitter or whatever and shout out, hey, I'm looking for mentorship to get into the games industry as a person, as a woman or as a queer person or person of color, whatever, who out there is interested in helping me. And my experience is there will be people who immediately say, oh yeah, I'm here, let's do it. So
yeah, there's several that we can point you to as well, Kevin. And sorry, I didn't realize I didn't mute myself, so you all got to hear me diagnose my 9-year-old not being able to turn on his monitor. Okay, all right. So I'm going to get Tom over to the Discord. Right now, we're going to kick it over to Indy and Danny for Danny's talks on monetizing user-generated content. And we will see you all shortly.
Thank you again.